Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed viewers, and fellow economic enthusiasts, welcome to another scintillating episode of Boss Economics World. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into the murky waters of the U.S. economy, where the numbers might look pretty, but the reality is far from picture perfect. Buckle up, folks, because we're about to embark on a wild ride through the economic wonderland of America's battleground states. It's a tale of smoke and mirrors, where GDP growth is the magician's sleight of hand, and the audience, that's you and me, are left wondering where our prosperity disappeared to. Let's start with the headline that's got everyone buzzing: 6 out of 7 battleground states outpacing national economic growth. Wow, sounds impressive, doesn't it? But hold your applause, because this economic performance is about as reliable as a politician's promise. First up, let's talk about the so-called blue wall states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. These industrial powerhouses have supposedly bounced back faster than a rubber ball on steroids. Michigan and Wisconsin are strutting around in the top 10 for GDP growth, while Pennsylvania has pulled a Lazarus, rising from the dead after a first-quarter contraction. But here's the kicker, folks. This growth is about as substantial as a cotton candy diet. Let's break it down. 1. The mirage of manufacturing. Sure, manufacturing might be contributing to GDP, but where are the jobs? It's like throwing a party and forgetting to invite the guests. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that manufacturing employment in Michigan is still down 2.7% from pre-pandemic levels as of August 2023. In Wisconsin, it's down 3.1%, and in Pennsylvania, a whopping 4.5%. So much for that industrial renaissance. 2. The construction conundrum. Construction is booming, they say. But let's look at the housing market, shall we? The National Association of Realtors reports that existing home sales in the Midwest region, which includes our beloved blue wall states, fell 16.4% year-over-year in August 2023. Nothing says economic prosperity like a housing market that's colder than a Michigan winter. 3. The healthcare hustle. Ah yes, healthcare, the sector that's supposedly carrying these states on its broad, stethoscope-adorned shoulders. But here's a thought. Maybe, just maybe, the reason healthcare is booming is that people can't afford to stay healthy in the first place. The Commonwealth Fund's 2023 scorecard on state health system performance ranks Michigan 24th, Wisconsin 12th, and Pennsylvania 19th out of 51 states and territories. Not exactly a picture of health, is it? Now let's saunter down south to the Sunbelt battlegrounds Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. These states are apparently outperforming the national average, basking in the warm glow of economic success. But hold on to your sun hats, because this growth story has more holes than a slice of Swiss cheese. 4. The electric vehicle enigma. Yes, the Biden administration has been pushing for investment in electric vehicle manufacturing like it's going out of style. But let's charge up our critical thinking batteries for a moment. The Center for Automotive Research reports that while EV sales are growing, they still only accounted for 7.2% of total U.S. auto sales in Q2 2023. That's hardly an economic revolution, folks. It's more like trying to power a monster truck with an AA battery. 5. The green energy gamble. Green energy investments are all the rage, but they're about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. The Solar Energy Industries Association reports that while solar installations are up, supply chain issues and rising costs have led to project delays and cancellations. In North Carolina, for instance, solar capacity additions in Q2 2023 were down 31% compared to Q2 2022. So much for that sunny economic forecast. 6. The tourism trap. Let's not forget about poor Nevada, lagging behind with a measly 1.8% GDP growth. The culprit? A sluggish accommodation and food services sector. But here's the real kicker. Even in states where tourism is supposedly booming, it's a mirage. The U.S. Travel Association reports that while domestic leisure travel has recovered, business travel spending is still expected to be 16% below 2019 levels in 2023. It's like throwing a party where half the guests are cardboard cutouts. Now, I know what you're thinking, but the numbers, the growth, surely it means something? Well, my dear viewers, let me introduce you to a little concept I like to call the GDP illusion. You see, GDP is like that friend who always looks great on Instagram but is a mess in real life. It might show growth, but it doesn't tell you who's benefiting from that growth. Let's look at some cold, hard facts. Income inequality. The Economic Policy Institute reports that from 1979 to 2020, the top 1% of earners saw their wages grow by 179.3%, while wages for the bottom 90% grew by just 28.2%. That's not economic growth. That's economic apartheid. Cost of living. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that the Consumer Price Index rose 3.7% over the last 12 months as of August 2023. Sure, it's down from the eye-watering highs of 2022, but try telling that to your wallet when you're at the grocery store. Student debt. Outstanding student loan debt in the U.S. reached a staggering $1.77 trillion in Q2 2023, according to the Federal Reserve. Nothing says thriving economy like an entire generation drowning in debt. Healthcare costs. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services project that national health spending will grow at an average annual rate of 5.4% from 2021 to 2030, reaching nearly $6.8 trillion by 2030. I guess we'll all be healthy if we can afford it. But wait, there's more. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say the elephant and donkey in the room. This economic data is being paraded around like a prized pig at a county fair, with both sides claiming it supports their candidate. Vice President Kamala Harris is apparently closing the gap on economic issues in recent polls. Well, isn't that convenient? It's like finding out you're the tallest person in a room full of hobbits. When the bar is set so low that the economy isn't completely in shambles is considered a win, you know we're in trouble. And let's not forget about the former president, Donald Trump, still leading on economic issues in surveys. It's like being voted most likely to succeed in a high school where half the students dropped out. When your economic plan is as clear as mud and as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake, maybe leading in the polls isn't the flex you think it is. But here's the real punchline, folks. None of this matters to the average American. As economist Mark Wittner so eloquently put it, people don't put GDP in their gas tank. They don't buy GDP at the grocery store. Ain't that the truth? The reality is, while politicians and pundits are busy patting themselves on the back for GDP growth, real people are struggling. Let's look at some sobering statistics. Food insecurity. Feeding America projects that 44 million people, including 13 million children, may experience food insecurity in 2023. Nothing says economic boom like not knowing where your next meal is coming from. Housing affordability. The National Association of Realtors reports that the Housing Affordability Index dropped to 91.7 in July 2023, meaning a family with a median income could afford just 91.7% of a median-priced home. The American dream is alive and well. If you're dreaming of living in a cardboard box. Retirement savings. According to the Federal Reserve's 2022 survey of consumer finances, the median retirement account balance for all families is just $65,000. I hope you like working, folks, because retirement is looking more like a fairy tale than a reality for most Americans. Underemployment. While the unemployment rate might look low, the U6 rate, which includes part-time workers who want full-time work and discourage job seekers, was still at 7.1% as of August 2023. It's like bragging about how many friends you have on Facebook when half of them are bots. So what's the takeaway from all this, my dear viewers? It's simple. The economy is like a magician's act. You might see growth and prosperity on the surface, but look a little closer, and you'll find it's all smoke and mirrors. The battleground states might be growing faster than the national average. But for whom? It's like throwing a lavish party where only the VIPs get to eat the caviar while everyone else is left fighting over stale crackers. Let's take a closer look at some of these supposed economic miracles. Arizona's economy grew at a 3.9% annual rate in Q2 2023, outpacing the national average. Sounds great, right? But let's peel back the layers of this economic onion. Housing crisis. The Arizona Department of Housing reports that the state has a shortage of 270,000 affordable housing units. So, the economy's growing, but where are people supposed to live? In luxury cactus condos? Water woes. The state is facing a severe water crisis, with the Colorado River reservoir levels at historic lows. Nothing says sustainable economic growth like running out of water, folks. Income disparity. The Arizona Center for Economic Progress reports that the top 1% of earners in Arizona make 19.5 times more than the bottom 99%. It's like economic Hunger Games out there. Georgia's 3.5% GDP growth in Q2 2023 has politicians crowing like roosters at dawn. But let's look at what's really happening in the Peach State. Rural decline. While Atlanta booms, rural Georgia is withering on the vine. The Georgia Budget and Policy Institute reports that 37 of Georgia's 159 counties have lost population since 2010. It's like having a shiny new sports car with 3 flat tires. Healthcare desert. Georgia ranks 46th in the nation for healthcare access and affordability, according to the Commonwealth Fund. Who needs doctors when you've got GDP growth, right? Education exodus. The Georgia Department of Education reports a teacher shortage, with over 4,000 vacancies as of 2023. But hey, who needs teachers when you can learn economics from political sound bites? North Carolina's 3.2% GDP growth is being touted like it's the second coming of economic Jesus. But let's look at the fine print. Manufacturing mirage. While new EV plants are making headlines, traditional manufacturing jobs continue to bleed out. The NC Department of Commerce reports that manufacturing employment is still 2.5% below pre-pandemic levels as of August 2023. Poverty paradox. Despite the growth, the NC Justice Center reports that 13.5% of North Carolinians lived in poverty in 2022. It's like having a feast where a significant portion of the guests are watching from outside the window. Broadband blackout. The NC Department of Information Technology estimates that nearly 1 million North Carolinians lack access to high-speed internet. Welcome to the digital economy, if you can connect to it. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say the donkey? Vice President Kamala Harris is apparently closing the gap on economic issues in recent polls. Well, isn't that just peachy? It's like being excited about moving from the basement to the ground floor of a burning building. The Bloomberg/Morning Consult poll shows Harris in a virtual tie with Trump on handling the cost of everyday goods. Congratulations, Madam Vice President. You've managed to convince people that you're just as capable of watching them struggle to afford groceries as your opponent. What an achievement! And let's not forget the crowning glory, an 11-point advantage on who would most help the middle class. Oh, be still my beating heart. It's like being voted most likely to maybe possibly consider thinking about potentially helping the middle class someday. I'm sure the millions of Americans living paycheck to paycheck are breathing a sigh of relief. But wait, there's more. The economy remains the top issue for voters, with more than 2/3 thinking it's going off the rails. It's like being on a runaway train and arguing over who's the best conductor. Here's a wild idea. Maybe focus on stopping the train before it goes off the cliff? Now, let's talk about the real kicker, inflation. Sure, the rate has slowed, but prices are still higher than Snoop Dogg at a Cheech and Chong reunion. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that while the annual inflation rate was 3.7% in August 2023, down from the 9.1% peak in June 2022, prices are still significantly higher than pre-pandemic levels. Food at home, up 3% over the past year and 22.7% since August 2019. Shelter, up 7.3% over the past year and 20% since August 2019. Energy, down 3.6% over the past year, but still up 19.8% since August 2019. It's like being told you're not drowning as fast as you were before. Gee, thanks. I'm sure that's a real comfort to families trying to figure out how to afford both dinner and keeping the lights on. But hey, at least we've got all these shiny new EV plants and green energy investments, right? It's like trying to fix a leaky roof by installing solar panels. Sure, it looks great on paper, but you're still going to get wet when it rains. Let's break down this green energy bonanza. The EV mirage. While EV sales are growing, they still only account for a fraction of total vehicle sales. The International Energy Agency projects that EVs will make up about 18% of new car sales in the US by 2030. It's like trying to stop a flood with a teaspoon. Good luck with that. The solar slowdown. The Solar Energy Industries Association reports that while solar installations are up, rising costs and supply chain issues are causing project delays and cancellations. It's like planning a beach vacation during hurricane season. Sounds great until reality hits. The wind power whimper. The American Clean Power Association reports that wind power installations in Q2 2023 were down 78% compared to the same period in 2022. Talk about running out of hot air. And let's not forget about the jobs these green investments are supposed to create. Sure, there might be some new jobs in EV manufacturing and solar installation, but what about all the workers in traditional industries being left behind? It's like playing economic musical chairs, except when the music stops, millions of people are left without a seat. Now, I know what you're thinking, but surely all this economic growth must be good for something? Well, my dear viewers, let me introduce you to a concept I like to call the trickle-down mirage. You see, while GDP might be growing and stock markets might be soaring, the benefits aren't exactly raining down on the average American. Let's look at some more depressing statistics. Wealth inequality. The Federal Reserve reports that as of Q2 2023, the top 1% of Americans held 32.2% of all wealth, while the bottom 50% held just 2.6%. It's like playing Monopoly where one player starts with Boardwalk and Park Place, and everyone else gets Baltic Avenue. Wage stagnation. The Economic Policy Institute reports that from 1979 to 2020, productivity grew 61.8%, while hourly compensation grew just 17.5%. It's like working harder and harder to run on a treadmill that's actually moving backwards. Retirement insecurity. The National Institute on Retirement Security finds that the median retirement account balance for all working-age families is just $2,500. I hope you like the taste of cat food, folks, because that's what's on the menu for your golden years. Healthcare costs. The Kaiser Family Foundation reports that average family premiums for employer-sponsored health insurance rose 55% from 2008 to 2018, outpacing both wage growth, 26%, and inflation, 17%. It's like paying for a Rolls-Royce and getting a Yugo. But wait, there's more. Let's talk about the real elephant in the room, the national debt. As of September 2023, the U.S. national debt stands at over $33 trillion. That's trillion with a T, folks. It's like maxing out your credit cards to buy a yacht when you can barely afford a rubber ducky. And what are we getting for all this debt? Crumbling infrastructure, underfunded schools, and a healthcare system that's more interested in profits than patience. It's like taking out a second mortgage to renovate your house, but instead of fixing the foundation, you just slap on a fresh coat of paint and call it a day. But fear not, dear viewers. Our esteemed politicians have a solution. More of the same. It's like trying to cure a hangover by doing more shots. Brilliant strategy, folks. Let's dive deeper into this economic cesspool. Shall we? Florida, while not one of the 6 outperforming battleground states, deserves a special mention for its so-called economic miracle. Governor Ron DeSantis has been touting Florida's growth like it's the second coming of the Roaring '20s. But let's take a closer look at this Sunshine State swindle. Housing horror. The Florida Housing Coalition reports that 921,828 very low-income households are severely cost-burdened, spending more than 50% of their income on housing. Nothing says economic boom like choosing between rent and food. Climate catastrophe. Miami-Dade County estimates that sea level rise could cost the region $3.2 billion by 2040. But who needs dry land when you've got GDP growth, right? Tourism trouble. While tourism has rebounded, the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association reports that the industry is still facing severe labor shortages. It's like inviting everyone to a party but forgetting to hire the caterers. Texas loves to brag about its economic growth. But let's look at what's really happening in the Lone Star State. Energy instability. Remember the 2021 power grid failure that cost the state's economy up to $130 billion? The Texas Tribune reports that the grid is still vulnerable. Nothing says economic powerhouse like regular blackouts. Water woes. The Texas Water Development Board projects that water demand will increase by 9% from 2020 to 2070, while water supplies are expected to decrease by 18%. It's like planning a pool party in the middle of a drought. Income inequality. The Center for Public Policy Priorities reports that the top 1% of Texans have an average income 24 times that of the remaining 99%. Everything's bigger in Texas, including the wealth gap. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. We've got an economy that's supposedly growing, but for whom? It's like having a pie that keeps getting bigger, but 99% of the people only get to fight over the crumbs. Let's talk about some more systemic issues that these GDP numbers conveniently ignore. We're told that education is the key to economic success. But let's look at the reality. Student debt crisis. The Federal Reserve reports that total student loan debt reached $1.77 trillion in Q2 2023. It's like telling someone they need a boat to survive, then tying an anchor to their leg. Teacher exodus. The National Education Association reports that 55% of educators are thinking about leaving the profession earlier than planned. Who needs teachers when we've got GDP growth, right? Skills mismatch. The National Skills Coalition reports that 52% of jobs require skills training beyond a high school degree, but not a 4-year degree. Yet only 43% of workers have access to such training. It's like having a bunch of square pegs and only round holes in the job market. Our healthcare system is the envy of the world, if by envy you mean cautionary tale. Medical debt. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau reports that $88 billion in medical debt appeared on consumer credit reports as of June 2021. Nothing says world's richest country like going bankrupt because you got sick. Drug prices. The Rand Corporation found that prescription drug prices in the U.S. are 256% higher than those in 32 other countries. It's like paying for a Rolls-Royce and getting a tricycle with a bell. Dr. Burnout. The Mayo Clinic reports that 63% of physicians experienced burnout in 2021, up from 38% in 2020. But who needs healthy doctors when the GDP is growing, right? We keep hearing about infrastructure investment, but let's look at the reality. Crumbling bridges. The American Road and Transportation Builders Association reports that 42% of bridges are at least 50 years old, and 46,154 are considered structurally deficient. It's like bragging about your car's paint job when the engine is about to fall out. Water woes. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives America's drinking water infrastructure a C- grade. Nothing says developed nation like not being able to drink the tap water. Broadband blackouts. The FCC reports that 19 million Americans still lack access to broadband internet. Welcome to the digital economy. If you can connect to it. While we're busy celebrating GDP growth, the planet is cooking faster than a microwave burrito. Economic impact. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reports that in 2022, there were 18 weather and climate disaster events with losses exceeding $1 billion each in the U.S. But hey, as long as the GDP is growing, who cares if we're underwater, right? Job displacement. The International Labor Organization estimates that 80 million jobs may be lost by 2030 due to climate change. It's like celebrating job growth while ignoring the tsunami headed our way. Agricultural upheaval. The USDA projects that climate change could cost the U.S. agriculture sector $5 billion annually by 2050. I guess we'll all have to develop a taste for sand, because that's what we'll be farming at this rate. Now, let's circle back to our battleground states and their miraculous economic growth. It's like being excited about winning a sandcastle competition while ignoring the rising tide. Sure, you might be on top for now, but give it a few hours and you'll be treading water. The reality is, this economic growth is about as evenly distributed as a pizza at a toddler's birthday party. A few people are gorging themselves, while the rest are left fighting over the crusts. Let's break it down state by state. Sure, Michigan's GDP grew by 4.2% in Q2 2023, but let's look at the fine print. Auto industry anxiety. While EV investments are making headlines, traditional auto jobs are in decline. The Center for Automotive Research projects that the transition to EVs could result in a net loss of 75,000 jobs in the U.S. by 2030. It's like celebrating the birth of a new baby while ignoring the fact that your teenager just moved out. Water woes. The ongoing Flint water crisis is just the tip of the iceberg. The Natural Resources Defense Council reports that 1.9 million Michiganders were served by water systems with lead service lines in 2021. Nothing says economic powerhouse like not being able to drink your tap water. Education exodus. Michigan's Department of Education reports a shortage of 86,000 teachers by 2025. But who needs education when you've got GDP growth, right? Wisconsin's 4.2% GDP growth sounds great until you look closer. Rural decline. While urban areas are growing, rural Wisconsin is struggling. The Wisconsin Policy Forum reports that 40 of Wisconsin's 72 counties lost population between 2010 and 2020. It's like having a garden where half the plants are thriving and the other half are withering away. Manufacturing mayhem. Despite the GDP growth, Wisconsin's manufacturing employment is still below pre-pandemic levels. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that as of August 2023, manufacturing employment in Wisconsin was still down 3.1% from February 2020. It's like bragging about your weight loss while ignoring the fact that you've lost all your muscle mass. Dairy distress. Wisconsin's iconic dairy industry is in crisis. The Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection reports that the state lost 360 dairy herds in 2022 alone. So much for America's Dairyland. Pennsylvania's 3.2% GDP growth is being celebrated like it's the second coming of the steel industry. But let's look at the reality. Coal country collapse. While overall GDP might be growing, coal country is dying. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection reports that coal production has declined by 45% since 2010. It's like celebrating your overall health while ignoring the gangrene in your foot. Opioid epidemic. Pennsylvania has one of the highest drug overdose death rates in the country. The CDC reports that Pennsylvania had the third highest number of drug overdose deaths in the nation in 2021. But hey, as long as the GDP is growing, who cares about public health, right? Infrastructure insanity. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives Pennsylvania's infrastructure a C- grade. It's like bragging about your car's top speed while ignoring the fact that it has no brakes. Arizona's 3.9% GDP growth is being touted like it's a miracle in the desert. But let's pour some cold water on this hot mess. Water crisis. The Colorado River, which supplies 40% of Arizona's water, is at historic lows. The Arizona Department of Water Resources projects that by 2035, the state's water demand could outstrip its supply by 1 million acre-feet annually. It's like throwing a pool party in the middle of the Sahara. Education emergency. Arizona ranks 47th in the nation for per pupil spending, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. But who needs educated workers when you've got GDP growth, right? Heat wave havoc. Phoenix experienced a record-breaking 31 consecutive days of temperatures at or above 110 degrees Fahrenheit in 2023. The Arizona Department of Health Services reports that heat-related deaths have increased by 400% since 2014. Nothing says booming economy like being too hot to go outside. Georgia's 3.5% GDP growth looks great on paper. But let's peel back the layers of this economic onion. Rural healthcare crisis. The Georgia Health News reports that 8 rural hospitals have closed in Georgia since 2010, leaving many communities without access to critical care. But who needs hospitals when you've got GDP growth, right? Income inequality. The Economic Policy Institute reports that the top 1% in Georgia earn 22.3 times more than the bottom 99%. It's like having a feast where one person gets a 7-course meal and everyone else gets to lick the plates. Voting vexation. While not directly economic, Georgia's controversial voting laws have led to boycotts and lost business opportunities. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reports that Georgia lost the 2021 MLB All-Star Game due to these laws, costing the state an estimated $100 million in revenue. It's like shooting yourself in the foot and then complaining about the hospital bill. North Carolina's 3.2% GDP growth is being celebrated like it's the second coming of the Wright brothers. But let's take this economic plane for a reality check. Tech trouble. While the Research Triangle Park boasts of tech growth, the rural-urban divide is widening. The North Carolina Justice Center reports that 47 of the state's 100 counties have poverty rates higher than the national average. It's like having a smartphone in one hand and a rotary phone in the other. Educational exodus. The North Carolina Association of Educators reports a teacher vacancy crisis, with over 4,400 openings at the start of the 2022 to 2023 school year. But who needs teachers when you've got GDP growth, right? Climate calamity. The North Carolina Climate Science Report projects that the state will face increased flooding, more intense hurricanes, and rising sea levels. Nothing says economic stability like having your coastal real estate underwater. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. We've got an economy that's supposedly growing, but it's like a bodybuilder with massive arms and chicken legs. Impressive at first glance, but fundamentally unstable. Let's talk about some more systemic issues that these GDP numbers conveniently ignore. We're told that technology is the future, but what about the workers it's leaving behind? Job displacement. A study by the Brookings Institution estimates that 25% of U.S. jobs are at high risk of automation. It's like celebrating the invention of the car while ignoring all the horse and buggy manufacturers going out of business. Skills gap. The World Economic Forum reports that 50% of all employees will need reskilling by 2025 due to technological adoption. But who's going to pay for this training? Certainly not the companies making billions from automation. AI upheaval. Goldman Sachs estimates that AI could replace the equivalent of 300 million full-time jobs. It's like creating a robot butler and then realizing it's taken over your entire house. We're told the gig economy offers flexibility and opportunity. But let's look at the reality. Income instability. The Economic Policy Institute reports that gig workers earn 58% less than full-time employees when accounting for expenses. It's like being told you can eat whatever you want. But the only thing on the menu is ramen noodles. Lack of benefits. Gig workers often lack health insurance, paid time off, and retirement benefits. The UC Berkeley Labor Center found that 30% of gig workers live in poverty. Nothing says economic prosperity like not being able to afford a doctor's visit. Job insecurity. The nature of gig work means no job security. It's like playing musical chairs with your career, never knowing when the music will stop. We're told that big business drives economic growth, but at what cost? Market concentration. The Open Markets Institute reports that in over 75% of U.S. industries, market concentration has increased since the 1990s. It's like playing Monopoly where one player starts with all the properties. Wage suppression. The Economic Policy Institute estimates that corporate concentration has suppressed wages by 20%. It's like being told you're getting a raise, but it's in monopoly money. Innovation stagnation. Studies show that as markets become more concentrated, innovation tends to decrease. It's like having a race where one runner has cement shoes and the other has rocket boots. We're celebrating GDP growth while ignoring the environmental costs. It's like throwing a party on the Titanic and ignoring the iceberg ahead. Climate costs. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reports that since 1980, the U.S. has sustained 350 weather and climate disasters where overall damages reached or exceeded $1 billion. The total cost? Over $2.545 trillion. But hey, as long as the GDP is growing, who cares if we're literally underwater, right? Biodiversity loss. The World Wildlife Fund reports that wildlife populations have declined by 69% since 1970. It's like celebrating your garden's growth while ignoring that all your bees have died. Resource depletion. The Global Footprint Network reports that we're using natural resources 1.7 times faster than the Earth can regenerate them. It's like bragging about how fast your car goes while ignoring that you're almost out of gas. So what's the takeaway from all this, my dear viewers? It's simple. GDP growth is about as meaningful as a participation trophy in the economic Olympics. It tells us how much stuff we're producing, but not who's benefiting, who's being left behind, or what we're destroying in the process. The battleground states might be growing faster than the national average, but it's like being the fastest runner in a three-legged race. You might be ahead, but you're still hobbling along. What we need is a new way of measuring economic success. One that takes into account not just how much we're producing, but how that production is distributed, how sustainable it is, and how it impacts our quality of life. We need to look at metrics like the Gini coefficient. This measures income inequality. The World Bank reports that the U.S. Gini coefficient was 41.5 in 2019, higher than most developed nations. It's like having a pizza party where one person gets half the pizza and everyone else has to fight over the crumbs. The Genuine Progress Indicator, GPI, this takes into account factors like environmental damage and income distribution. While GDP has been steadily rising, the GPI has been stagnant since the 1970s. It's like bragging about how fast your car goes while ignoring that it's falling apart. The Happy Planet Index. This measures sustainable well-being. The U.S. ranks 108th out of 140 countries. It's like being the richest kid in school but also the most miserable. The Social Progress Index. This measures quality of life factors like health, education, and personal rights. The U.S. ranks 28th globally. It's like having the biggest house on the block, but with no running water or electricity. In conclusion, my dear viewers, the next time you hear a politician or pundit crowing about GDP growth in battleground states, remember, it's all smoke and mirrors. It's like being excited about winning a sandcastle competition while ignoring the rising tide. What we need is real, sustainable, inclusive economic growth. Growth that lifts all boats, not just the yachts. Growth that doesn't come at the expense of our planet, our health, or our future. It's time to stop playing economic whack-a-mole and start addressing the systemic issues that are keeping millions of Americans trapped in a cycle of poverty and insecurity.